Hey everybody, Dr. Jordan Goldstein coming at you here. I'm just trying something new here. I want to try responding to some of the comments and questions that I get on Twitter that are directly related to what I'm teaching in my classes. So this week, I kind of let everybody know that I was talking a little bit about PED use, and I was using it as an example of how we have these issues in the world of sport that we believe to be black and white when it comes to moral issues, and doping maybe at the top of the list in terms of it's obviously wrong or it's obviously right. And I got a decent amount of questions as to how can PED use be considered moral, or how can PED use be considered good. So I thought I'd just make a quick little video here and try to explain it using the exact slides that I use in my classes um, to try and suss out these difficult moral issues. Right. So when we're talking about the issue of doping or PEDs, like what are we talking about? We're talking about athletes injecting banned substances into their bodies in order to increase their performance, give them an unfair advantage over their opponents, and essentially break the rules of competition. And when we ask the question, is it wrong for athletes to take PEDs? That kind of a question leads us to a black and white answer. Yes, it's wrong. No, it's not. Now, when I ask this question to, all of my students, a couple hundred of them, nobody was really willing to say yes, it's good, or yes, they should be allowed to. The only ones who wanted to go there was kind of like, well, in some competitions where it doesn't necessarily matter so much, or if we could relax the rules. So there's always a sort of a condition attached to it. But what I'm after in the class, and what I talk about quite a lot on Twitter, is that oftentimes what we think is a black and white, right and wrong situation is actually just a promotion of one's subjective preference. That we like certain things and we don't like other things, and we wrap that into the language of this is right or this is wrong. And the doping issue in sport is absolutely one of these issues that exemplifies this, because when we bring in a subjective kind of a question, like why is it wrong for athletes to take PEDs? Well, this opens up a whole host of different ideas as to why this is such a transgression. And my lesson was in the context of defining sport. So you can see my title here, What is Sport? And the point I'm trying to make is the different values that we place at the center of sport will alter our behaviors or our perceptions as to the moral qualities that are necessary to make sport a positive. So in terms of why is it wrong for athletes to take PEDs, there are a bunch of general questions, or sorry, a bunch of general responses that you get and that I get from students, right? It's these are banned, so it's against the rules. So it's a form of cheating. These are dangerous, right? The reason why these substances are banned is because they're harmful to the athletes. So it's sport is for health in that sense. We like there to be standardized competition, right? So everybody's got to submit to the same rules. So there's this notion of fairness. Um, but the way that we can think about the morality of PEDs is not so much in promoting their use as good, but in understanding that promoting their use as bad is littered with subjective preference. So what does that look like? Maybe if I could figure out how to work a PowerPoint, I could get there. Here we go. It's not like I do this all the time. All right. And what I mean by these moral preferences, or these subjective preferences, is it's very easy to realize that some of these objections are not based in ethical black or whites, because we could easily change them. So the first one, if sport's about competition and PED use is immoral because it breaks the rules, I mean, that's a very easy solution. We could tomorrow eliminate every single rule, right? From all of the major sporting leagues, the international sporting federations, WADA. We could disband WADA. Um, that solves the problem really simply, right? And now there are no rules against doping, and so we can't break the rules. But I'm sure that for people out there listening, that's not enough, right? Like that's not enough to move doping or PED use into the good category. You're more likely to think, well, didn't we just condone something that's bad? And why did we ban them in the first place? So this lets us know that oftentimes when we are talking about these moral issues, we are coming at them from different values, right? We have different values that we locate in these activities. And oftentimes what offends one person is really offending their sensibility in terms of the value, and why seemingly it doesn't make a difference to another person. And we can see this playing out with these different understandings of what sport is for and how they orient us around the use of PEDs, right? So if sport is for health, and this is the reason why we don't allow certain substances in, well, one of the things that we'd also have to recognize is that competitive sport, elite sport, is also not meant to maintain health. In fact, it's actually a detriment to health. You know, professional athletes, elite athletes break their bodies in pursuit of athletic excellence. They retire with chronic injuries. They're often forced to retire due to injuries. They often push through pain. They train when most of us would be resting. And it's not this isn't a place for healthy people, right? And another thing is that a lot of the substances on the banned list are not actually dangerous. There's an inconsistent application. So somebody, the famous example I always use is Nicholas Backstrom. He's a Swedish hockey player. He takes a Claritin every day for seasonal allergies, and he was barred from playing in the gold medal game in the 2014 Winter Olympics due to taking this allergy medication, which does not harm him and doesn't necessarily give him any sort of an advantage, but it gives you this sense that some things that are on the list don't really have anything to do with the protection of somebody's health. And so if the reason we don't like these particular substances is because we think they're unhealthy, well, then we would have to reimagine our whole entire understanding of what's the purpose of competitive sport, because that's also not for health, right? And I don't think too many of us care if somebody decides to put steroids in themselves and they go to a rec competition, or the stakes of competition are very low. We don't seem to care about doping in those situations. So this again shows us that it's not a black and white, but it's based on what somebody's subjective preference is. I make this point quite a bit, although in 2021 I don't know how important this is for a lot of people anymore. But we used to think it was respectful to not question what people did with their bodies in terms of putting in certain substances or not. And a lot of people think sport exists as a means of personal expression and fulfillment. And so, really, whose business is it? If we could bring everybody into alignment with the rules in terms of competition, right, so that nobody is breaking a rule, which we can understand. That's a pretty fair criticism, right? It's against the rules. It's cheating. It's breaking sort of the trust of the competition. But in terms of why we care, generally speaking, we shouldn't care what people put into their bodies. It's theirs. We allow people to experiment and risk with all sorts of things in society. Why is it that we will stop athletes? And one of the things that I often get at this point in terms of an objection is, well, there's a difference between natural and unnatural, right? Like what you train with your body. If you're lifting weights and you're sort of tinkering with your diet with natural foods, that is a little bit more honest in terms of the integrity of your performance, as opposed to somebody who sticks a needle into their arm, right? That's an idea. But what is natural and what's unnatural? I play a video that talks about the first time Gatorade was used in competition. And Gatorade is something that was concocted in a lab by scientists with the explicit goal of increasing performance, there's nothing natural about like artificial sugar water, which with food coloring, which is what Gatorade basically is with some salt. Yet we see it on the sidelines. We see all athletes like guzzling down this stuff. Yet something like blood doping, EPO, where you take your blood out, it gets sort of cycled through and manipulated to enhance the oxygen capacity, essentially, and then it's inserted back into your body. I mean, there is a manipulation process, yes, but what's more natural than your own blood? And that is deemed a performance enhancer. So this natural versus unnatural, again, would be inconsistently applied. And so you might go back to this notion, well, nutritionists and personal trainers, they exist for health reasons, right? To which I would agree, they do exist for health reasons, but not for elite athletes. They're not in the corner of the elite athlete in order to get them to sort of this peak health and this sort of longevity strategy. Why are they tinkering with their nutrition and their diets and their physical training regimens? It's to maximize performance. It's to get peak physical conditioning so that on the day of competition you are ready to go in your best self. It's not a maximize my health over my lifetime strategy. So again, what's natural, what's not natural, what's for health, what's not for health, what is about competition and what's not about competition. And one of the really intriguing parts, and we'll end here, is that sport exists to demonstrate excellence. Like especially if we're talking about competitive elite level sport, which is the level that we care about when we're talking about performance enhancing drugs. If sport exists and competitive sport exists for excellence, then why aren't we allowing athletes to experiment with any type of strategy, supplement, substance that will allow them to break the limit of what we thought was previously achievable for the human body, for the human form? And again, we start to then get into this definitional issue of, well, a drug isn't a full representation of what your ability is. But sometimes athletes don't use performance enhancing drugs to increase performance. Something like anabolic steroids, for example, that's the poster boy for performance enhancing drugs, because it gives you that that muscular look and it allows you to build muscle. But a lot of athletes who actually use steroids use it for recovery from injury, to allow them to recover faster. They don't actually use it to get stronger in the sense that we would assume it. So again, now we're starting to muddy up the waters, right? Am I allowed to use steroids if I'm just using it for injury prevention, or sorry, not prevention, but for rehabbing and rehabbing my injury, but not if I'm just trying to get myself stronger? What's the line? Where's the difference? How can we draw a sharp boundary between one or the other? And is it then and then are we talking about somebody's motivation? Why are they using it? Internal motivation versus external motivation. All it does is open up a whole new host of potential issues that again are related to subjective preferences, not necessarily ethical black and white boundaries. And that's not to say I'm somebody who thinks doping is okay or we should celebrate the idea of using artificial stimulants. My position is that we should allow people to decide on their own, both in terms of the athletes who want to potentially take these or not, the fans who potentially want to see the best performance regardless. Like, there are a lot of people who think if we're just banning certain kinds of athletes because they decide to use certain kinds of substances versus others who don't, and the only issue is the rules, which we could eliminate the rules easily, right? Then I'm not ever getting to see the best of the best. I'm not seeing who could actually do something of quality or of excellence or of a record when we talk about breaking a record with their body. Like, I'm not getting everybody. I'm not seeing everybody. And some people actually believe this about the Olympics. They don't watch the Olympics because it's not a true representation of athletic excellence, because ultimately what the PED ban looks like, when we start to break it down this way, is it looks like a subjective ban on the kind of people we want to be participating. We don't like people who take these substances. We think it reveals something that is bad about their moral character and quality, and so we would rather keep them away from sport in order to keep it pure. That's what it looks like to me, at least. And that's the same kind of attitude that it led to athletics being banned for women, minorities, the poor. It's this exclusionary attitude when it comes to who can participate and who can't. And we have a very strong sensibility against doping, and I believe that's coming from a good place. But I think it's mostly coming from this notion of breaking the rules or unfair advantage, and that stuff can be easily cleaned up in terms of its moral clarity. We just have to alter the rules. But then there's a class of people that suggests this type of athlete, this type of person, should never be allowed to compete because what they're doing is dishonoring sport, dishonoring themselves, dishonoring their opponent. Which, fair enough if that's your position, but that's not a black and white ethical consideration. This is a moral preference that you have against one kind of person participating versus the other. And I suggest that it's largely based upon arbitrary criteria and it can't be consistently applied. And so this leads us to the gaps, and this leads us to sort of the difficulties we see with the performance enhancing drug issue in sport. That was a lot longer than I thought it would be. But when professors start talking about the things they're interested in, it's very difficult to shut them up. Okay, so I hope that provides a little bit of my reasoning as to why I talk about these things and how I talk about them in the class, and maybe has made you think a little bit differently about what is a performance enhancing drug and why don't we like the people who we think use these things. All right. Bring me some more questions, everybody. I'd love to do some more of this stuff. I'll see you around.